Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Easily Knitfluenced and my name is Michelle. This is my little corner of the internet where I talk about all things to do with knitting, what I'm making, what I'm thinking about, lessons I've learned, and so on. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around. So today I kind of thought we'd do something a little bit lighthearted. So we are doing my probably unpopular knitting opinions. So I am expecting some slightly spicy comments for this one, but this is intended to be tongue-in-cheek. It is intended to be lighthearted. We're all on our own journeys, so, please don't take any of what I say here personally. If you disagree, that's completely fine. You are your own person. We all have different opinions, and you do not need to be my clone. So anyway, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get started. So I have a couple of unpopular opinions I want to share, but before we do that, just want to share the finished object I'm wearing today. This is my Peggy sweater by Lee Knits. I'm filming in the morning. This is probably, one of the last mornings I'm going to be able to wear this. By around noon, it's usually too warm to be wearing any kind of long sleeve anything. I'm based just outside of New York, so we are heading straight into spring summer season right now. So I'm wearing this while I can, so, enjoy. But this is a lovely sweater. I've talked about this on my podcast episode, so I won't belabor that. Okay, unpopular opinion number one. Mohair is overrated. Now, before you all come for me with your pitchforks and brand the letter H on me for hypocrite, I didn't say mohair is bad. I said it's overrated. And I'm not saying it's bad because look at my podcast. I knit with mohair too. And I'm going to get to the purpose I think mohair serves, but I'm saying it's overrated. Now, how do I know that? I know that because let's run a little thought experiment here. If you think back to before you started knitting, how much mohair did you have in your wardrobe? I am willing to bet good money that the answer is either none or almost none. Now, my mother, back when she bought clothing in kind of the 1980s, I think she had a couple of mohair pieces, a handful. That's probably the most I've ever seen in anybody's individual closet. So when you look broadly at the knitting world and you see just the frequency with which mohairs are used in knits, I think it gives the false impression that this is the be-all end-all of knitwear, that every knit piece needs to have mohair in it. And that is just not the case. Because if that were the case, back before you started knitting, you would have felt this yearning for something that was missing in your closet. And I'm willing to bet that you didn't feel that. So it's not that it is bad. I like mohair. I knit with mohair. Is it necessary to have in 90% of the patterns out there? No, I don't think so. Now, I think mohair serves a real purpose, and this is my kind of, maybe slight rabbit hole conspiracy theory, but I think mohair, and I think it was Taylor Earle from Wool Needle Hands who actually coined this phrase. She said, mohair conceals a lot of sins. And it does. It's true. When you combine mohair with something, this one is a great case in point, right? This is an all-over texture sweater. And I've held a single strand of fingering and a strand of mohair for this one. And sure enough, this evens out. When you're doing texture and you're kind of switching between knits and purls constantly, sometimes your tension might not be so even. Now, mohair and the fuzzy kind of conceals some of those sins. So I have this theory that for a lot of knitwear designers out there, it makes sense to include mohair as a suggested yarn in their patterns, because when people buy their patterns and knit them, it's going to mean that the finished product is just going to be more pleasing. It makes sense. And look, if I were a knitwear designer, I'd probably throw in a couple of mohair strands for anything where I was going to be worried that by and large, tension or, texture or something else could potentially be an issue. Anyway, this has no basis in fact. This is just my kind of musings from my observations, but that's how I feel about it. And, mohair is not the be-all end-all. In fact, the other sweater that I completed last month, which was the Stockholm, I knit in a single strand. And that looks just as nice, as this one. And it's no different. I have, no different feelings towards that one versus this one. So yes, mohair is overrated, in my opinion. Unpopular opinion number 2, I think purling is fine. I have nothing against purling. And I've said this before. This may be because I have, I don't want to say a unique knitting style, but I think I'm a little unusual in that I throw my yarn. So first of all, I'm an English knitter and I throw my yarn. So I am not flicking, I'm not wrapping yarn around any fingers. In fact, I'm just holding yarn between my index and my thumb. So the motion for me to purl versus to knit is exactly the same. It doesn't change. It's just like kind of the full motion of my hand. And so purling is not any tougher for me than knitting. It takes me a little longer maybe, but not a huge difference, to be honest. So I have never understood the, purling is awful kind of viewpoint. But that's because I'm not a continental knitter and I'm not kind of turning my wrists as much as maybe some other knitters would be. So to me, purling is fine, don't care. But related, and onto unpopular opinion number 3, ribbing is the devil. I hate knitting ribbing. It takes forever. I find it so boring. It is, I've scratched entire patterns off of my my wish list before because they had giant sections of ribbing. Like for example, at the bottom of sweaters, you see that sometimes with the split hem, too much ribbing. And I was like, I can't even, the rest of this sweater might be gorgeous. I might love wearing it eventually, but I can't imagine knitting like, I don't know, 6 inches of ribbing at the bottom of a sweater. So it is always the worst part of the garment for me. And that's the annoying thing because they're the finishing touches, right? It's like the cuffs, the bottom of the sweater, collars. I just can't stand it. I find it so tedious. So tedious. And that's where I'm really slow. I am very slow at ribbing. Not purling in and of itself, but ribbing, I'm slow. I find it dull and boring. And unfortunately, it's a necessary evil. So there we are. What are you going to do? Unpopular opinion number 4. Knitting blankets was not worth my time or money. So I used to knit a lot of non-garment pieces. So think, well, they were some garment, accessories. So I would knit rectangular objects basically because I was terrified of knitting in the round and kind of constructing something like this. So I would knit giant throw blankets. I would knit, scarves, things like that. And listen, I knit blankets sometimes like out of really nice yarn, like expensive yarn. I would spend, $300, $350, $400 on an amount of yarn for a blanket. And guess what? They take forever, first of all. Like, I think crochet blankets obviously are way quicker. Knit blankets, super slow. They took me an absolute age to make. And now, if you ask me where those blankets are in my house, like I couldn't even tell you. I think, none of them are in here. I can tell you that. I think there's one kind of thrown over a bed in a guest room somewhere that I never see, really. There's one maybe thrown into a basket downstairs. My point is, they're not like treasured items that I'm enjoying or doing anything with, really. So, occasionally I might pull one out to sit under it on the couch, but pretty rare, to be honest. Like I have a busy life. I don't do a lot of couch sitting. So maybe that'll change, but yeah, I look back and I'm a bit like, man, I wish I had spent that money and the yarn on something else. So there's always the option of unraveling them and using the yarn for something else. That's the great thing about knitting. But man, imagine frogging a blanket-sized item. That's a lot of work. Like rewinding the yarn, finding something else to do with it. So I don't know. I just look back and I wish that I hadn't spent so much time making things that ultimately I wasn't going to do anything with or even enjoy. So it was like a pure process knit, but a very expensive process knit. So kind of regret that. Wasn't really worth my time. And, frankly, for a lot of them, I didn't really learn all that much either because, you're not doing the usual, it's a blanket. You're not doing the increases. You're not kind of learning things like shaping sweaters and like picking up stitches and things like that. So not only was it like kind of a waste of money, but I also didn't really learn much from it. So that's unfortunate. Not to say that all blankets are a waste of money. And look, there's people out there making definitely more beautiful things than I did. I just think in terms of my expenditure, and I was silly in the way I spent money, to be honest. In the terms of my expenditure, it just really, it hasn't made a whole lot of sense for me. So homewares are something I'm very wary of right now because, yeah, I just look around and I'm like, I didn't really enjoy the homewares that I made before, and I spent a lot of money on them. So, okay, opinion number 5. Speed isn't everything in knitting. I feel like the knitting universe, I guess, on social media is a little obsessed with a couple of things. Yarn stashes is one, like certain aesthetics. And then there's sort of a subgenre, I guess, that I've stumbled on, which is people knitting really quickly. Just flying through projects. They make like 45, 50 different projects every year. And listen, good for them. Amazing if you can like knit consistently that fast and your quality is great and it's just something you enjoy. But for me, there's a real value, I think, to slowing down. And that's why I kind of have this hobby, is because it forces me to slow down and concentrate and not like fly through stuff the way I do with other tasks in my life and kind of, get through it as quickly as possible. Like I want to slow down. And listen, there may be quick knitters out there who are just perfect and like they're quick and they make a zillion things a year and their tension is always perfect. But I've noticed like when I try to hurry up on things, my tension suffers, So there's kind of some value, I think, in keeping it slow and keeping it consistent and, making however many items that means for you. But yeah, speed is not everything, in my opinion. And the other thing is like, okay, so speed is, in and of itself is not a bad thing, but like, if you are producing 45 or 50 finished objects in a year, where are you keeping all of this stuff? I mean, you could give some of it away, sure, but to me, that verges into like complete process knit territory because, I mean, I'm just thinking about my wardrobe, like my closet. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have the room to store like, I don't know, 40 garments every year. Like, it would just be overflowing after, I don't know, a year and a half. I'd have to start giving stuff away or donating it. And that's also not really why I'm in this, is to just do process knits. Like some knits you do inevitably will be that, but that's kind of not the be all end all for me. Okay, and then my last opinion for this video, I don't really understand sock knitting. So I might change my tune on this one if I do eventually get into socks, but I just don't see the appeal. I see all these sock patterns and I'm like, oh, lovely in theory, beautiful things to look at. God, they're gorgeous. What a cool accomplishment to be able to knit your own socks. But for me, like my socks, I mean, maybe I'm just a gross human being, but like my socks get nasty. Like they're, I garden, I do things outside, I'm active with 2 little kids. My socks take an absolute beating. And, for me, when I'm knitting something, I mean, socks are small and yes, like, it's not the same energy expenditure or like monetary expense as knitting like a sweater or something bigger like this. But at the same time, like it's your time and money going into something. And I just don't live the kind of life, I guess, where I can be precious about what I'm putting on my feet. Like, I don't know. I just am very, very rough on my socks. Like the store-bought, I buy good ones because I want them to last a little longer, but eventually they all fall apart. That's what happens to my socks. And it would just, I can see one of two things happening if I started sock knitting. Either I would keep them somewhere like in a museum little case or something and just never ever wear them, which again would be a waste. Or I would wear them and then they would like just completely fall apart in, I don't know, a week. Also, like I wash my socks in the machine is the other thing. So I'm like, can I really be bothered with like fussy sock washing? Maybe I'm not in the season of my life where this is a thing for me. So listen, seasons change, my life might change, something might change where all of a sudden sock knitting is appealing. But right now I find it like kind of intimidating to think about, and also just something that logistically doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So sock knitting confuses me. So that's it, guys. Light and breezy today, nothing too heavy here, but these are just my unpopular opinions as I have been through this knitting journey. So like I said, you know, I welcome all comments, suggestions, questions, but let's keep it civil. This was not an attack on anyone, so I hope you take it in that spirit. So that's it for today. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Like, subscribe, drop me a comment if you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Take care.